Welcome to Preventing Overdiagnosis 2014. I'm Fiona Godley, Editor-in-Chief of the BMJ, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you here on behalf of the band of brothers who've created this meeting, the BMJ, Bond University, Consumer Reports, Dartmouth Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine, and our hosts, the University of Oxford. It's an enormous pleasure. This is our second Overdiagnosis conference. Last year's groundbreaking conference at Dartmouth in America was beginning to build on what we all sensed was an international wave of science, skepticism, critique and concern at the harms of too much medicine. Last year was a sort of gathering of disparate tribes, groups who'd been toiling on their own in different disciplines, specialties, thinking they were on their own, wondering quite what they were seeing in their work. And the meeting really brought people together and gave them a sense of solidarity, gave us all, I think, a sense of solidarity, morale boosting, really getting a sense that there were many people beginning to notice and beginning to work in this rather esoteric field. And you'll get a sense of the meeting if you know that at the end I felt the need to quote Henry V's speech from Agincourt. We few, we happy few, we band of brothers. For he today that sheds his blood with me shall be my brother, be he ne'er so vile, this day shall gentle his condition. And gentlemen of England now abed shall think themselves accursed they were not here, and hold their manhoods cheap, whilst any speaks that fought with us upon St. Crispin's day. Well, gentlemen of England, and indeed gentlewomen of England, have heard the call, for this is a sellout meeting. We have overflow in other rooms. We have had to turn people away. Someone visiting from Zambia has said to me, we've kept the fire burning. So this is a meeting which inspires huge interest. And we have here over 400 people from 15 countries. We've got doctors, patients, consumers, clinical researchers, funders, academics, policymakers. And we've had 500 abstracts submitted, 90 accepted for oral presentation, 40 posters and 18 workshops. It's going to be a fantastic meeting, and I really am so grateful that you're all here. The aim of the meeting is to move us on from the evidence that overdiagnosis and overtreatment exist to evidence-based action. This isn't to say that we should stop the evidence building. There's an enormous job to be done to improve the quality of research in this area, to look at methodologies, to examine study design, very, very hard-headed science, as well as the chest beating, the drum beating, the Henry V speeches. We want funders, we want commissioners to commission and fund this research. We want clinicians to know what to do on the ground. We want policymakers to give them their support. We want, above all, to maintain our critical faculties. There could be nothing worse, I think we all agree, than getting this wrong. If we overstate the case, if we fail to be critical of our own work, we really do damage to the cause and damage to patients. So this is a meeting that is a scientific meeting as well as a gathering of the clans, if you like. We want it to be interactive. I'm not going to mention the Scottish referendum. We want it to be interactive. There's a Twitter feed, which is #pod2014. Please do tweet. We want as many Q&A as possible. We're going to ask the speakers to keep themselves within time. And we want the workshops to be very interactive and proper working meetings. So please do engage and involve yourself as much as possible. We've got 3 fantastic speakers to start us off. Our first speaker was a GP, the former president of the Royal College of GPs in the UK. She has been a BMJ columnist. She's fierce, insightful, eloquent, compassionate. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Iona Heath.
Thank you very much. It's an amazing privilege to be here, and it's just astonishing. And I won't be able to speak if I carry on that vein, so I will just carry on. I think this is the most splendid outfit. Why don't people wear shorts like that anymore? I mean, those are really superb. This is the wonderful butterfly hunting Vladimir Nabokov. And in one of his brilliant essays, he seems to capture the reason why many of us are here. And he wrote, "The lovely thing about humanity is that at times one may be unaware of doing right, but one is always aware of doing wrong." And I suspect that very many of us here are here because we've begun to worry that we're doing wrong. Carried along on tides of medicalisation, we are doing harm while trying to do good. And doing harm while trying to do good is a tragic predicament. In the preface of her influential essay, Illness as Metaphor, Susan Sontag wrote, "Illness is the night side of life, a more onerous citizenship. Everyone who is born holds dual citizenship in the kingdom of the well and in the kingdom of the sick. Although we all prefer to use the good passport, sooner or later, each of us is obliged, at least for a spell, to identify ourselves as citizens of the other place." Now today, Susan Sontag's kingdom of the well is being inexorably absorbed into the kingdom of the sick. And clinicians and health services are busy ushering people across this important border in ever-increasing numbers. Sontag clearly recognises the discomforts of the kingdom of the sick and the extent to which an imposed citizenship there corrodes the joys of life. Yet this was published in 1978, before the erosion of the kingdom of the well had really begun in earnest. After the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, neoliberal economics was unleashed, and health became a commodity like any other. As we all now recognise, the exploitation of sickness and fears of sickness for the pursuit of profit increased hugely over subsequent decades, underpinned by the rapid commercialisation of healthcare. Now, more than 3 decades later, fewer and fewer of us find ourselves still holding Susan Sontag's good passport, and ever more are corralled into the kingdom of the sick earlier than ever, and our residency there becomes longer and longer. The invasion is legitimised by being described as an epidemic of chronic illness, although many of those affected have no symptoms whatsoever. The motivation of for the invasion is provided by a toxic combination of wishful thinking, vested interest, and good intention. The costs, personal, social, and economic, are enormous. The principal weapons deployed are detaching notions of disease from the experience of suffering, broadening the definitions of disease, turning risk factors into diseases, and most potent of all, fear. There's a terrible synergy of fears which we have to address if, working face-to-face with individual patients, we are going to be able to stem the tide. Many clinicians feel helpless in the face of an increasing stampede across Sontag's now very porous frontier. But patients need clinicians courageous enough to reassert the border between the well and the sick, so that people only make the journey across when medical care is appropriate and will produce more benefit than harm. So I want to talk about 3 separate strands of fear. The existential fears that afflict all of us, the fears of patients, and the fears of healthcare professionals, and perhaps especially the fears of doctors. So everyone, to a greater or lesser extent, is afraid of dying. In Hamlet, Shakespeare provides his famous description of death as the undiscovered country from whose bourne no traveller returns. And it is perhaps this quality of completely uncompromising unknowability that makes death so terrifying. Philip Larkin's great poem, O Bard, captures the dread and horror with a visceral intensity. Waking at 4 to soundless dark, I stare. In time the curtain edges will grow light, till then I see what's really always there. Unresting death, a whole day nearer now, making all thought impossible, but how and where and when I shall myself die. Arid interrogation, yet the dread of dying and being dead flashes afresh to hold and horrify. Being human, doctors face precisely the same existential challenges of finding meaning in the face of loss, suffering, and the finitude of life, and they are no less afraid of their own dying and being dead than anyone else. They have no particular existential aptitude and very little relevant education. Physicians are thrust repeatedly into situations in which the professional tasks, peculiar to their status as physicians, are linked to the existential tasks they share with all persons, maintaining a sense of meaning, security, and connectedness in the face of mortality and finitude. It is no wonder, perhaps, that we resort so often to our increasingly sophisticated biotechnical means, rather than paying real attention to the care of the dying as one of the core ends, one of the core purposes of medicine. Perhaps we should be reading more Montaigne. In this wonderful biography subtitled A Life of Montaigne in 1 Question and 20 Attempts at an Answer, the first answer is don't worry about death. And it recounts Montaigne's experience of serious injury sometime in 1569 or early 1570. He was 36 years old, and over the previous 6 years, he'd lost his best friend, his father, and his younger brother. And he was thrown from his horse when another rider collided into the back of him at speed, and he seems to have suffered injuries to the head and chest. And he had to be carried home a considerable distance. And once he had recovered a degree of consciousness, he appeared to be in terrible distress, struggling to breathe, clawing at his clothes, coughing and vomiting large amounts of blood. He was not expected to survive. And it was at that time, contemplated in retrospect, that he made a surprising discovery. As Sarah Bakewell writes, he could enjoy delightful floating sensations, even while his body seemed to be convulsed, thrashing around in what looked to others like torment. Montaigne's comforting testimony suggests that the body and the mind become to some degree disconnected when death is imminent. And like Montaigne, those who appear to be distressed may in fact be experiencing delightful floating sensations. And after he recovered, Montaigne himself wrote, "If you don't know how to die, don't worry. Nature will tell you what to do on the spot." Fully and adequately. She will do this job perfectly for you. Don't bother your head about it. And it seems that Montaigne never worried about death again, and perhaps we all shouldn't all be so certain that death is inevitably going to be agonizing and distressing when we can never actually know. So the intrinsic existential fears of patients are compounded by the specific fears related to their particular symptoms, and sometimes exacerbated by the detail of particular family history. Patients are also afraid that their doctors will not understand what they try to describe, and that an important diagnosis will be missed or made too late through laziness, incompetence, or just bad luck. And of course, this is fueled on a daily basis by newspapers and other news media, and even more so in those unfortunate countries that have direct-to-consumer advertising. So far, so bad, but it's much worse. This is by the wonderful Hilda Bastian from her brilliant Scientific American blog, The Disease Prevention Illusion, A Tragedy in 5 Parts. In case you can't read it, I think you can all read it. But I think this captures in just one picture everything I might want to say about the joy-sapping consequences of health screening interventions aimed at the individual patient. Yet for most people, the more they know about what could be wrong with them, the more frightened they become. And preventive rhetoric has taught us slowly to be afraid of what we eat, what we drink, what we breathe, lying in the sun, tra-la-la, etc., etc. The fears of doctors mirror those of patients. Doctors work every day in fear of missing a serious diagnosis and precipitating an avoidable tragedy for one of their patients every day. And in our increasingly punitive societies, with all the easy talk of naming and shaming, they are afraid of being publicly pilloried. Yet clinical work is hedged in by uncertainty on all sides. The application of generalized truths of biomedical science to the unique context of an individual patient's life and circumstances will always be uncertain. So doctors, and perhaps especially young doctors, are learning to be afraid of uncertainty. We order ever more tests to try, often in vain, to be sure about what we are seeing. And because we are afraid that those in the kingdom of the well should perhaps be in the kingdom of the sick, we continually divert resources from the sick to the well, so that overdiagnosis inevitably becomes linked with the undertreatment of those already sick. Overdiagnosis and undertreatment are the conjoined twins of modern medicine. Patients' fears fuel their doctors' fears and vice versa, especially within healthcare systems that are fragmented and which allow the erosion of continuity of care. It is only within strong relationships of trust that fear can be in any way contained. Yet as the American philosopher Martha Nussbaum argues, uncertainty, contingency, unpredictability disrupt the gloomy predictability of linear determinism, and they are what makes life worth living. The human being who appears to be thrilling and wonderful may turn out at the same time to be monstrous in its ambition to simplify and control the world. Contingency, an object of terror and loathing, may turn out at the same time to be wonderful, constitutive of what makes a human life beautiful and thrilling. Only because we do not understand everything and because we cannot control the future is it possible to live. British philosopher Stephen Toulmin could be thinking about contemporary healthcare and the worries and fears of young and inexperienced doctors when he writes, "In facing problems about the use of new knowledge for human good," and I think that's just a brilliant definition of medicine, "we may ignore the ideal of intellectual exactitude with its idealization of geometrical proof and certainty. Instead, we must try to recapture the practical modesty of the humanists, which let them live free of anxiety despite uncertainty, ambiguity, and pluralism." And Toulmin also points out that the Renaissance humanists, who include Shakespeare, Montaigne, Cervantes, and Rabelais, held that in practical disciplines, which is what medicine always is, questions of rational adequacy are timely, not timeless, concrete, not abstract, local, not general, particular, not universal. And the phenomenon that Peter Skrabanek called risk factorology aspires to be timeless, abstract, general, and universal. And yet its rise has been exponential, and it has become a potent source of fear among patients and doctors. Every healthcare professional is now required to consider an ever greater array of potential risks to the patient's health, however well that patient may be feeling. And every responsible and rational citizen is expected to actively seek out and eliminate all possible risks to their future health and to consume medical technologies in order to achieve this aim. And consider how many of the protocols and guidelines and screening programs that are driving so much overdiagnosis and overtreatment that also claim to be timeless, abstract, general, and universal. When we in the discipline of medicine, which will always be practical, need precisely the opposite qualities. Perhaps we should begin to test our decisions and our rational adequacy against these opposite criteria. And if we had done this, we might not have needed Choosing Wisely Canada to advise us that this little lot were more likely to harm than to help. And you know, this is my living will. I don't want any of this, thank you. Uncertainty exists in the gap between the territory of human suffering and the map of biomedical science. The task of making the medical map useful to those trapped within the territory of suffering is and will always be fraught with uncertainty because of the vast extent and infinite variation of the territory and because of the comparatively rudimentary nature of the map. But the uncertainty and doubt that clinicians experience every day are also what make new knowledge and understanding possible. We have to doubt existing explanations if we are ever to discover better ones. Yet however good the map becomes, there will always be limits to how much medicine can achieve, despite the gloss of millions of pharmaceutical advertisements. And we all need to be as honest about these limits as James McCormick, once the great professor of general practice at Trinity College, Dublin. Our patients deserve of us accurate diagnosis and appropriate treatment. But when accurate diagnosis is impossible and appropriate treatment unavailable, we delude both them and ourselves by using diagnostic labels and prescribing specific treatments. When we as general practitioners are in a position to cure illness, cure is usually readily achieved. But cure only signifies postponement of death. It does not confer immortality. No matter how far medical science advances, it can never eradicate human suffering or the fear and fact of death. The great comfort is the unpredictability of the future. None of us here knows exactly what will happen to us or to anyone tomorrow, especially the people in Scotland, perhaps. We know a lot about probability, but probability is a long, long way from certainty. People do not always get the result predicted by their lifestyle. Not everyone who smokes or is obese dies prematurely, however frustrating that is for public health practitioners. Conversely, a good diet and regular exercise does not provide complete protection from random disaster. Nonetheless, when death or disease occurs prematurely and unpredictably, the linear rationality of the rhetoric of preventive medicine suggests that someone, somewhere, must somehow be at fault. That's what makes doctors afraid. It's this sort of reductive, linear reasoning that makes doctors so fearful and invites them always to do more rather than less, however harmful the consequences. But of course, the situation is infinitely more complex. So uncertainty is actually the basis of intellectual freedom and of political resistance. We should nurture it, treasure it, and teach its value, and not be afraid of it. So let me end with the wisdom of Zigmund Bauman, Emeritus Professor of Sociology at the University of Leeds, and he clearly demonstrates the false certainty of some medical predictions by still being alive at 88, despite his obvious love of tobacco. Bauman writes, "To be responsible does not mean to follow the rules. It may often require us to disregard the rules or to act in a way the rules do not warrant. Only such responsibility makes the citizen into that basis on which can be built a human community resourceful and thoughtful enough to cope with present challenges. I wish all of us the courage to always consider the timely, the concrete, the local, and the particular when we care for each individual patient, and if necessary, to disregard the rules. Only on this basis can we build a healthcare community resourceful and thoughtful enough to cope with our present challenges." Thank you very much.
We've got time for a couple of questions. There's one over there, and I'll take one other. And if you could wait for a microphone. Is there going to be a microphone? Other questions, please? Courage to ask diagonal questions.
Rob Jackson, University of Auckland, New Zealand. I totally agree with you that uncertainty is essential for but should we not be trying to define the boundaries? Rather than just take the origins of we try to prevent of something, and then be very clear about our degree of uncertainty in those assessments. Is that
Hold your fire, and anyone else who's got questions before I close? That will be our last question.
Fine. I'm really not sure. I don't think we can help ourselves doing that. I mean, I think we do that all the time. We do that about whether the bus will come and what the weather will be tomorrow. We make a risk prediction. Humans make risk predictions. Medicine will do that. I just think that it has become very destructive, and especially for well people. If we would just leave well people alone. If we could just try and help sick people.
But how do you know they're well unless you predict the risk?
I don't even need to answer that. Thank you very much.